Okay, welcome everyone. We are live streaming on multiple platforms. I'm here with my colleague Alexander Pletsch, and we're going to be talking with Alex about his career path in, I think moving from the private sector, also working in government in the public sector, and then finally in-house counsel, which is what he's currently his current role is in, and we'll have some students joining us as well. Um, and we'll be asking questions of Alex. You guys can use the chat section on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn as well to ask questions. We welcome those questions. Okay, very good. Let me just pop everyone into the call here. I think some people dropped off by accident, but as they pop in, we'll have them join. Okay, Alex, welcome. If you don't mind, just taking a few minutes to introduce yourself and kind of tell us about your career path. That'd be great.
Sure. Yep, my name's Alex Pletsch. I've known Loran quite a while now, but my whole career, I guess, started when I went to law school in the UK at Sussex University. It was a good decision. I kind of needed something, and I decided law school was right up my interest alley, and I went to law school in the UK. And coming back, I was motivated, obviously, to become a lawyer as fast as possible. So finishing the NCAs as quickly as possible was definitely a priority. Loran, I mean, just a shout out to Loran that he was a big part of me being able to get through those quickly, and then subsequently the bar very quickly, and get to being called in 2018, I believe, 2018 June. And from there, I mean, I negotiated or kind of found a position in a private law firm doing a very niche type of law for my summer between first and second year of law school. And I, saw what the inner workings of a firm was. And after coming home and while doing the NCAs and the bar, I worked at this same law firm. And it was a law firm that specialized in property tax law and any variations of that. So valuations, going to court, tribunals, what have you. And the benefit I had was this was a very small firm. They'd never had an articling student. They'd never had summer students before. So it was a new firm as well. So I was the first one. I helped develop the curriculum for an articling student. And, it allowed me flexibility to a certain degree to also study for NCAs, but also learn this business in a pretty organic way, which I have to say was probably, not something that happens all the time under a structured articling position, but definitely, helped in the long run. So I did that. And then after being called to the bar, I was offered a full-time position as an associate, junior associate, whatever you like to call it. And I mean, I think it was just a testament, after talking with the lawyers a little bit more candidly, it was just showing good attitude, hard work, obviously, but, a desire to learn, ask questions, take initiative. All these kinds of soft skills, quote unquote, were definitely, part of what made me an attractive candidate to bring on as a first articling student. And, I worked there for, my goodness, I have a little bit of a weird trajectory, so remembering the dates, but I did work there for maybe 3 years. And I learned, crazy amounts of things about the substantive work about, property tax law and expropriation and some real estate. And it was fantastic when you also get you're in a small firm like this, you get a lot of exposure to things that you might not necessarily get exposure to in the first, year, 2 years of your career at a big firm, right? I was second chair in some, tribunal hearings, court cases. I was able to prepare questions for examinations, cross-examinations, theory of the case. So I got a lot of exposure that might not necessarily have been coming my way had it been at a normal, quote unquote, normal firm or circumstance, what have you. And after that, I mean, I recognize that, this is not necessarily the most common type of law. So I switched to a property or kind of a real estate estates kind of firm for about a year to try my hand at something new. And I got a lot of experience with, property law, different facets of that, estate law, some commercial, though that wasn't the biggest component of the firm, but it was tangential to the things that I'd already been learning, but it definitely gave me a little bit of a wider experience base, which was great. But I realized after that I needed a little bit more of a challenge, I think. I mean, I saw maybe that was it was interesting in its own right, but it had a lot of repetition. And, I needed a bit more from a mentor than I was getting. So I went back to the original firm where I worked for another few years and just kind of built on that same experience. I, worked on my own hearings, being the lead. I, got to, take on a bigger role in some of the cases that I was leading. I eventually, worked quite hard during the pandemic. It was, not a lot else to do. So it definitely translated to excelling a little bit more at the job, being able to give it 110%. And, I was motivated. I really wanted to do well. And that led to obviously a great opportunity to be partner, which I took. Just unfortunately with the pandemic, everyone was affected in their own way, but that industry itself was also affected by legislation freezes. So long story short, I decided I wanted to do something a little bit more transferable, let's say. I mean, being in a niche industry practice is good and bad. Niche in the sense that the substantive knowledge that I gained is not so applicable elsewhere in the laws. But on the flip side, with only 10 lawyers or what have you in Ontario doing it, it affords some other benefits too. Small bar, a lot of opportunities for, big clients, being in front of clients, taking charge of big cases, big valuations, all these kinds of things. So again, my choice was to go into infrastructure and construction law, which I found out about through my dealings at this private practice, seeing what companies were in that space, what they did, how it permeated pretty much everything that you deal with on a day-to-day, which I thought was quite alluring and interesting. And yeah, I mean, I took a leap. I read up, I did, my due diligence to understand what that industry was about the best I could from reading, talking to some people. Similar situations to this mentorship is talking to people about what day-to-day looks like, what working in infrastructure and construction is for a lawyer. I mean, everyone throws that around, but understanding how that workflow kind of takes place or gets done is a whole different beast. So I did that. I interviewed and I got a job at Infrastructure Ontario, which is kind of a pseudo-governmental body, agency, what have you, that pretty much takes care of all the major infrastructure, in Ontario on behalf of the government. So they have, special knowledge of, the legal aspects, the financial aspects, the project coordination. All of these things are confined in this industry. And so I got to work on amazing projects. It was a great place to learn the industry, obviously being new to it. Switching, I mean, I'll put a pin in that, but switching industries is difficult at any time of your career. Not impossible, but definitely, it's another learning curve, right? I mean, you're learning a whole new business. It's one thing to understand how to be a lawyer, but you have to now learn a new industry ins and outs. It comes with, a little bit of unconfident kind of behavior because you don't know everything off the top of your head like you may have in your previous industry. So, I mean, it's definitely scary, but worth it. So, I mean, I just want to put that out there. Switching industries is definitely not impossible. Does have its own challenges. You can kind of leverage your skills pretty well. I mean, being a lawyer, you're probably pretty good at that anyways, but that's important if you do want to change. I'd advise maybe that, doing it earlier in your career is a bit easier on yourself and also makes a potential employer a little bit more amenable to it when you have the ability to pivot, learn from whoever you're going to be working with or under, versus 20 years into your career. It's a little bit of a more difficult transition, I would say. I don't know, I've just heard, but I can just imagine extrapolating it, though not impossible. So
can I take you to that interview? Because I get this a lot from students, right? I'm worried about it going into this particular area. I'm worried about boxing myself in. How do I switch out of it? And, if you can think back, back to that interview, how did you market yourself? How did you sell yourself to make that change?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to first say that the position I'm interviewing for, even if I was a 4-year call at that point, I was definitely aware that I should be and would have the best chance of interviewing for positions that were junior, right? Like I can't go in with that same, for a 4 or 5-year call type of job, because I knew that my experience as a lawyer would translate somewhat, but my industry knowledge was zero. So I had to calibrate which jobs I went for. Like if you're a 5-year call, you can't go necessarily for 5-year experience jobs. So just calibrating your expectations before you even apply is the first thing. Just so you don't get in there and are expected to hit the ground running at a job where you don't know anything. It's failure for both parties. So I'd say that's the first thing. Just be a little bit aware when you're applying. And secondly, in the interview, I mean, I really try to find overlap in terms of either skills, maybe experiences that I'd done that I could leverage a little bit more. Like I went from a litigation and property tax to a solicitor type of role where I had to kind of talk about, oh, well, I've reviewed contracts, I've advised on contracts, I've sat with clients, I've, taken in concerns, translated that to drafting. Like I didn't have full solicitor experience, but I definitely had touched on it. And I think I spent more time, let's call it, talking about that element of it. So it goes without saying, talk about things that overlap or that you can intake from. But like I said earlier, I think your attitude and your curiosity, your interest to learn, like all these things are, and critical thinking, right? I mean, you're going to be asked questions that you don't know, and you can talk about how you would figure that out, looking at templates, reviewing it, asking questions, courses, show your interest, your ability to think about how you, even if you don't know something, how you might learn it. I think that, and I mean, I talked to the interviewers after I joined, and I kind of asked, because I, could be candid with them that I didn't really know what I was doing. Like, I mean, yes, I did my reading and whatnot, but they said, they're like, yeah, I mean, we can kind of teach you that. Like, we want someone who is you know, can be put in front of clients, can work with different departments, and, you know, take any information that they're giving from an engineer to a project manager to a finance person, take that information, understand it, have critical thinking, and then put it into a legal sphere. And they're like, that's what came through in your interview, more so than, hey, I have XYZ technical knowledge, because I didn't. But again, you know, it came back to the fact that they were looking for a, you know, 1-2 year call, which I could confidently say I had more than enough experience to as a lawyer, let's call it, the soft skills of communicating well, reading, emailing, you know, understanding what things are without necessarily being overloaded with it, you know, doing your own research. All those things were what I tried to put forward when transitioning from one career to the other. But I'd also say that, you know, I went from property tax to something sort of similar. If you went from, you know, construction law to family law, like, that's a very, I don't know what you'd have to do other than lean on your lawyer skills, your communication, all that kind of stuff. So that you know, take it with a grain of salt, that if you're switching from, you know, night and day kind of industries, it's going to require that much more preparation. You know, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine what you'd have to show in order to do that. And also, goes without saying, you're also going to be likely taking pay cuts, because you're going to be going from an industry where you are knowledgeable, a big resource, to somewhere where you're going to be learning for 6 months, give or take. I mean, not that you won't be valuable, but you might not be the same value in terms of billables, in terms of amount they can rely on you. So again, these are all factors, but again, they're not complete bars to changing. It is just, I mean, it's difficult. And like I said, the earlier you do it in your career, makes it a little bit easier, but it's doable anytime. I mean, I work with lawyers that did A and are now in B, and they did it after 10 years just because they didn't like the other one. So it comes to networking. I mean, that goes without saying, that networking helps to get experience, to be able to get in the door at some of these interviews. So that's another thing. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend. Just a good attitude, showing that you prepared, that you can speak a little bit to some of the things in your new role or your potential new role is huge, and not going in there and expecting that you're, you know, being a lawyer for 4 years means that you're just going to get this job in a new industry. I mean, it's not automatic. So,
right. So what I'm hearing is that, you know, the feeling of being boxed into, let's say, your first articling type of job, or, you know, is in a specific sector, it's not really true as long as you manage your expectations when you're switching roles, and you're not trying to, you know, you know, go for roles that are way above your head, right?
mhm, mhm,
And it might set you back initially, right, as you're learning some sort of new industry, but ultimately you've picked up on two different areas of law. Does that mean that you're now more valuable in your next move, your next lateral, you know, career move, because now you have this, you know, you've got this ton of experience in an incredibly niche area? Like you said, there
mhm,
were only like 10 other lawyers perhaps practicing in that area, so you picked up this really niche area of law, and then you've shifted and you made a big shift with your move into the public sector. Do you think that that made your transition again into in-house, I guess, or made you a more valuable lawyer? What are your thoughts?
absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's pretty much, you know, a certainty that if you have more experience, varied experience, whatever the case might be, it makes you more valuable as you go. I mean, that's a given almost, and it doesn't matter if it's so different or it's slightly different from one industry to the next. I think you develop a different way of thinking. Like, for example, litigation, allows you to think very differently than a solicitor, because you've seen how this works in theory when things in a contract don't work out. So, I mean, I think all these different experiences that you pick up on the way and transitions and whatever, I mean, yeah, maybe the substantial knowledge will be relevant, won't be relevant, but I think just the way of thinking, the way of working in different industries adds a huge, like, makes you so much more well-rounded. So I think in that sense, it's such a benefit. And again, that's probably another thing to add to your list of things you want to bring into an interview, right? Is just, hey, the way I think about problems. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, going into the public sector, in my interview, I said I worked in litigation. I know how this ends, or how to, what people look for when there's a conflict. So preemptively looking at that stuff in a contract, or when I'm talking about risks with someone, I know what this can look like at its worst, instead of someone who's never been in a hearing or whatever, doesn't understand how bad it can be. Like, if you've never seen something crumble, you don't know what it's like and how to preemptively get ahead of that. So yeah, I mean, I think just your experience, broad, different or not, is a huge asset as you move through your career.
Let me ask you about like your articling position, because you
Mm-hmm.
said you sought out to create an articling position.
Mm-hmm.
What brought you to this area of law? And if I can just append a second question to that, do you think it's better to start off niche, or
Mm-hmm.
do you think it's better to start off more general and broad, and why? So yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
a kind of two-part question, because you really started off niche, really niche, right?
Yeah, very much.
So yeah, why that area? Why did you try and create a position in that area? And
Well, I mean, it's a long story, but I'll try and keep it short. I had met one of the partners years before, completely unrelated, in another job. So I
okay.
knew that this type of law existed, but it was very outside the normal realm. So I forgot about it. And then after, a friend of mine from like elementary school, a neighbor, was a paralegal at this firm, and truly the only person I knew on in this legal industry or legal world. And I chatted with her about paralegal, and a little bit of what her day in the life was. And I asked her, I kind of said, is there a way I could come in and work for a summer, as just to get a taste of what working in a law firm is like? And that was my first summer between law school or first and second year of law school. So I sought out a job, and it happened to be in this industry. I don't think I sought out this industry in particular, because truly, I mean, just to give a scale of how niche it is, in the bar materials that are 1,800 pages or whatever they are, it has like a paragraph or two dedicated to it in one of the things. So I mean, I can't advise on whether to go niche or go general. I think they both have their benefits. Like I said, I mean, I think general gives you a better taste. Like, if you're not necessarily so suited to litigation, or you appreciate, policy analysis, you might go into tax. Like, there's being in a general practice where you get to taste a few different types of law, or yeah, just not even industries, just types of law, whether it's litigation, policy analysis, drafting, whatever the case might be. I think that would be a benefit in the long run, because you can get a taste of it all and see which one resonates with you more. I think that would be, if you could have your pick. But I also think a niche type of law, where you get to learn something so in depth and become invaluable, makes for a very interesting type of career as well, right? I mean, yes, it's not necessarily, I mean, property tax was never something that is applicable to majority of people, or sorry, the property tax legal world that I existed in was not for the normal day-to-day people, is for large corporations. So it's, again, it's an interesting one. It definitely has its own world that it exists in. And I mean, again, has its own challenges, but also the benefits are very hard to replicate in a general service firm. But look, I ended up having to go and try out working somewhere else to try and get a taste of different types of law. So, I mean, maybe some people stay, maybe they don't get the itch to try something different because it suits them really well. So, I don't think there's a right answer to that, whether it's niche or general. I think, again, they both have their pluses, but as someone who can confidently say that you have no real idea of what kind of law you want to practice truly, like even in law school, it doesn't prepare you for the day-to-day of it and what litigation, stress or exhilaration is compared to a solicitor kind of grind, but that is very satisfying in its own way. So I think, yeah, I mean, getting a taste of it is great if you can, but if you go into niche, you might find you might nail it and just be in it for 20 plus years and make a pretty good living for yourself and enjoy it. So I don't know. I mean, that answers, I guess, prong two. Prong one is I sought this out and it was a small firm and just the stars aligned that they were, a year-old firm. I could kind of come up with an art, I got someone made a articling principle. I came up with the curriculum. I, got it checked off, all that stuff. So, I mean, it had its own challenges, right? Is you might not go to a big firm and have a pretty big, department dedicated to your articling, but you also get one-on-one time with partners. You get to be involved and get feedback as much as you want or need or can handle, which is different, right? I mean, I didn't realize how insulated partners were at big firms, right? From articling students. Like there's a few layers in between. I was spoiled that I could go into any partner's office pretty much and talk about my day or a question I had on one document. It didn't have that same aura of hierarchy or whatever. So that was also good. So again, pros and cons to all of it. I think just some people are more suited or have an idea of what they want to do, and it is more general. So go for that.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and how that's different than both the private and the public
Sure.
practice you were doing. So now
Yeah.
you're in
So
a more in-house role, right?
yeah, definitely. So private, it goes without saying, very busy, stressful. I don't know if it's litigation or just the smaller firm. There's less people to hand off to. Again, part of those challenges, right? So quite busy. Definitely quick turnaround times. Definitely the life that you hear about being a lawyer. Late nights or getting something at 7 p.m. and having an 8 o'clock meeting, and your night is now becoming reviewing that document and plans changing and XYZ. So all of that was what I lived for 5 years, I guess. And I went into the private or public sector, which was the opposite, quite 9 to 5, very much. If you're overwhelmed, tell someone because we'll reallocate files. The expectations are not lower, but different. You're expected to get the work done, but if you can't handle it by 5 o'clock, it'll wait for the next day, and that's the benefit of working in the public sector. Obviously comes with downsides where it's not as engaging maybe or challenging, I thought. I don't know, maybe that was just the time I was there, whatever. Nothing bad to say about it. It was great. So that was one thing. And then I wanted a bit more. I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted to see the business side of things. So I chose to leave the public sector and go in-house to one of the firms or companies, that the public sector, the government would contract with. So it was just on the other side of the table. And that's what I'm doing now. And it's great. I get to see things right from the start, right from the first, joint venture teaming agreement that, a company wants to create to pursue these large, rail projects, transportation projects, highways, dams, bridges, all these kinds of big things. I get to see that right from the beginning, who we decide to team up with, the value of these projects, the strategy, the types of contracts that we're going to be using, the subcontractor negotiations. I see a huge facet of these things, and I get to review contracts with the government to, kind of get our interests either, put in, maybe tweaked to make the risk profile a little bit more palatable for us. So I get to see so many different elements of construction that's not just subcontracts or high level, hey, we need to change these 3 words in a template and it's going to take 6 weeks. Like, the bureaucracy of the public sector does also become it takes you away from the legal work. And now that's what I see day to day. I get to negotiate things. I get to be in front of clients. I get to be in front of owners. I get to be in front of, design engineering firms, their lawyers, to negotiate terms. I get to strategize on the business end if we have business needs and legal concerns. Sometimes legal concerns, as much as no one here wants to hear it, do get kind of pushed down because the profit is there, or we can make our money on this and we can make enough to like satisfy the risk. So it's very interesting. It's a different kind of legal role that is very much more advisory, because it takes second fiddle quite often, I'd say, to profits or what's a reasonable risk that we can stomach. And very satisfied here. Definitely more work-life balance than private sector. But also, when it's crunch time and we're submitting proposals for jobs, it does ramp up for a couple weeks, and there's some late nights, so you get a bit of a mix. And it's great. I've obviously, the people you work with, I have great people that I work with and around, and my bosses or like senior counsels are fantastic and great resources. So that makes a huge difference. Obviously, I got lucky with that respect, but the job itself is great.
Yeah, I remember, just getting out of law school and starting to look for articles and stuff like that. And you think, okay, when am I going to be making X amount of money?
Yeah.
When am I going to, and you feel like all this burden and pressure and debt and this and that, and you want to be earning a killing. And, somebody who might be watching this and might be thinking, okay, wow, he's worked, all these different roles already,
Mm-hmm.
successful lawyer. I'm thinking, has your mindset changed in terms of, what makes you satisfied inside in terms of the kind of positions you're
Great
looking for,
question.
right?
Mhm.
Maybe in the beginning you wanted to grind, you wanted to do those kinds of things.
Totally.
So I'm just thinking, have you grown over time? Your career goals, have they changed? And if so, how have they changed?
It's great when you're first out of law school. Yeah, you're hungry. You want to learn. You want to make money. You want to, I don't know if being partner is a driver, whatever the case might be. You have the energy. You have the almost like a bucket that can't be filled with like knowledge, and everything is new, and you're figuring out what you like, what you don't like, how to draft to this partner. You figure out firm logistics, firm politics, all these things, right? So it goes hand in hand with grinding, with putting your head down and making the sacrifices, not seeing friends or whatever as much as you might be used to, but you have this mindset that I want to make money, I want to be partner, I want to be the best, be good, right? And I think as you go on, and I have to say, what changed for me was getting overwhelmed and realizing, that my life and my identity was kind of consumed with being a lawyer when I was in private practice, because that's all I did. That's all I could talk about. That's, it took me away from events and whatever. and friends and family and all this stuff. And it was just all I cared about was just being good. Like it wasn't even money. I mean, money is a nice kind of after effect of it, of course, but I mean, it was more that. And then at some point I realized that like that wasn't satisfying. Like I had hobbies, I had other interests that I wanted to also pursue. And going into the public sector, and when I had more free time, I had, 5:30, I was done work. Weekends I didn't have to work. It made me realize that that is more aligned with myself. Like I don't care so much about being a partner, owning my own firm, the big kind of things that were drivers, I think maybe, a generation before me. And I think now being in-house, I have a great mix of that. And I think, again, the money's not the same. Well, be very candid, going into private practice it can be very lucrative, but they work. Like they are working till 11 at night, most nights. They get vacations and they can afford nice vacations, but they're always working. I don't like that as much. I like this middle ground, I would say, of in-house. I think it's a great middle ground. And yeah, I mean, over time, I think you just realize that maybe the money and not being able to spend it on things that you enjoy, whether it's travel, whether it's restaurants, whether it's going to a cottage or whatever, you can't do that. I think that changes you.
You
But
mean
some
because
people don't.
you don't have the time?
You don't have the
Does it?
time. You
Yeah.
just and you don't even, it's not even that you don't have the time, it's that even when you do those things, you'd have to be working, right? So going away to a cottage or going away on a trip, you'd just have to be working. So at some point, I think that is just for a lot of people, it's just too much for too long, right? After a while, you just say, hey, that's great, but I'm going to do something that is in-house or public sector or law adjacent, right? A lot of people do, HR, compliance, different kinds of things. And I think it's, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say all of them. I know a lot of people that went back from public sector to private because the money is alluring and, whatever. But I think like that's the way my goals have changed. And I mean, I'm lucky. Those first few years I made money to pay back the debts and, set myself up. But, on the flip side, I think like that type of life is really grating and tires you out. And yeah, I mean, it's just maybe you find a way to make it sustainable. But I think that's, for me, that's what changed, that I realized that wasn't for me. And I feel pretty secure in it, like in the decision. Obviously, at the time, taking a pay cut is tough when you're accustomed to a certain lifestyle, income, whatever. But it's been nothing but great for me. I've way less gray hairs than I did in my first 5 years of being a lawyer. So
For sure. I'm mindful of the time, but I do want to ask because there has been, constant change in your career.
mhm.
And you've gone from, all these different industries, but there has been something constant as well. And that's been your passion for teaching. That
Yeah,
hasn't changed.
yeah, no, I love it.
So tell me a little bit about that, because how many years has it been now that you and I have worked together?
It's been a long time. I mean, a little bit of context, my whole family is in the education space, so principals, secretaries, teachers, and that's what I grew up with and around. Family, friends were all in that world. So I always had, everyone else had the bug. I didn't so much. And then later in my career, after becoming a lawyer, realizing that I had a little bit of it, maybe not as much as the other people to make it my career. But I've been teaching since, well, I guess since 2018 when I got called to the bar. I've been teaching different facets, and I enjoy it. I enjoy teaching to sophisticated people,
Right.
topics where they're interested, and it's a little bit more of a dialogue amongst equals versus teaching, grade one, how to whatever, like that. I think that's why I wasn't so interested in it growing up, but now have found the pleasure in it. And I mean, it sounds cheesy. I like hearing when people pass exams, when people feel confident, when they ask questions that are well thought out. And all that stuff. I mean, there's a million parts that I probably could list off, but I do love it. I like learning. I like, honestly, when someone points out something I hadn't thought of. I mean, it happens, as much as I like to think I know everything, but no, it's great. I enjoy it, and I kind of wanted to keep going, and I try and fit it in the best I can to my schedule, and hope to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Alex, well, thank you very much for carving out time. I know it's your lunch break now, and we've got this session recorded so that people can play it back and watch it. And I'm sure it's going to be helpful for people to kind of follow other career paths as well. And I think it's very helpful that you've shared yours with us. We're going to try and do this more regularly. And we've got, a number of lawyers that have agreed to speak to us and kind of share their experiences, as Alex has. Alex, thank you again. I mean, it's been, I think, 7, 8 years now that we've been working together. It's awesome. You've also been a mentor to so many students and volunteered so much of your time. So we really, really appreciate, on behalf of all of the, internationally trained lawyers, the ones that you've worked with, and the ones who you've mentored. I know it means a lot to them. So thank you for that, and thank you for being part of this. I really appreciate you carving out the time for us.
I hope it lands and helps at least one person. So.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much. So we're signing off, and we look forward to seeing everyone at the next one.